This is the Honor Magic 4 Pro, Honor's latest flagship device, and from a photography standpoint, it's actually one of the strangest cameras I've ever covered here on the channel, and that's really because it's got some things I absolutely love about this camera, and actually make it, for me, one of the best smartphone cameras available on the market, and it's got other things and some situations where it just really doesn't shine, and ends up really not performing to its flagship status. These are just some of the sample shots I've been taking on the Honor Magic 4 Pro since I've been playing around with it, and like I said, some of these shots have genuinely blown me away with the fact that they've been taken on a smartphone, probably more so than any other smartphone that I've tested this year. But we will get onto why sometimes this is actually one of the weaker performing cameras later in the video. You might be wondering why this B-roll contains my friend Mike Chudley and not me, and that's because I actually helped Mike film some portions for his video on the Honor Magic 4 Pro, and he actually compared this camera to a high-end DSLR, kind of a bit like I tend to do on my channel. So if you guys are interested in a comparison like that for this camera, I will of course have his video linked down below in the description. So we'll kick off by talking about the lenses. I don't want to always talk about megapixels because I really feel like with smartphone photography in general, obviously having tested a lot of major flagship devices now, megapixels certainly aren't everything, and with smartphones this is even more true. The main rear-facing camera is a 50 megapixel sensor, and it also rocks a sort of similar status 50 megapixel ultra-wide facing camera. The telephoto on this lens, which will give you a 3.5 times optical zoom, is actually a 64 megapixel shooter as well. So again, on the surface, that is like absolutely amazing performance in terms of the hardware specs of this little camera. I do think one really strong thing about having a 50, 50 and 64 megapixel shooter on the back of this phone is that you can actually really rely on all of those cameras. I tested obviously the Samsung S22 Ultra, and the telephoto was significantly lower quality than the ultra wide and the standard main facing camera. That just totally wasn't up to scratch for me. I felt like every time you switched to the telephoto you were losing quality, and it's definitely not the case with the Honor Magic 4 Pro. Overall, I do think this is like totally mirrored in some of the shots. I think some of these telephoto shots were genuinely exceptional in terms of the quality that I was able to get out. Like we're shooting at, you know, a pretty high focal range here, and you were able to get really high quality looking photos out of this camera, and it's on a smartphone. Genuinely always amazes me when these phones can do that. So all of the photos you're seeing are completely unedited, straight out of camera, and genuinely just like look at some of these colors and compositions from the telephoto lens. Like really gorgeous, and definitely up there with some of the strongest performing flagship cameras that I've tested this year. The other lenses are also good. The ultra wide particularly is really capable. I was just really impressed with some of the quality of some of these photographs. Hopefully you guys agree. Let me know in a comment if you do. And this really comes back to what I said about being able to rely on the Honor Magic Pro 4 across all of those focal ranges. Low light also really impressed me with this camera. Obviously I think a lot of phones now do night photography really well by using the sort of super clever stabilization features that they've got built in within the phones and the cameras now. But something which really impressed me on the Honor was actually this transition between daylight and sunset to twilight. And you can see that the shadows are sort of nice and soft. We've been getting some nice silhouetting going on here. And like I said, I was just really impressed with the low light functionality. I think definitely in line with other flagships. And to be honest, I think even potentially a little bit better than some other flagship phones in terms of keeping these low light shots looking natural and not super like AI and sort of enhanced. So I do feel like the Honor Magic Pro 4 is like a really good, well-rounded flagship smartphone camera performer. However, I said that it was sort of a toss-up between really great experience and some bad experience. So now, obviously, let's discuss some of this bad experience. Biggest thing for me really was the consistency. So sometimes your photos come out looking amazing, and particularly on the zoom, that 64 megapixel zoom, sometimes your photos come out looking absolutely trash. And you can see that we've got a few before and afters, or shots taken at pretty much exactly the same time here, where some of these photos look amazing and some of them don't. I think my initial prediction is that this is due to stabilization, and sometimes this is why it happens particularly badly on that telephoto mode, is that your hand is maybe shaking slightly and it just can't snap on to what it thinks should be like the clearest thing in the frame. So it's doing a lot of sort of work behind the scenes to make these photos good, and sometimes it just doesn't work as intended. It also happens sometimes on those main, those sort of the ultra wide and the wide, but definitely not as obvious, not as pronounced. Consistency is like a super important thing with a camera, and I think the gold standard here is like the iPhone. I can be taking shots with my iPhone 13 and pretty much every single photo comes out looking exactly the same right out of the camera, and this is just not the same experience for this Honor phone. Another thing is shutter lag, and I hate to keep sort of comparing the Honor Magic 4 Pro to my iPhone 13, but again, another gold standard here. The iPhone is insanely quick in terms of taking photos and rarely ever lags out unless you sort of really were just going super hard on taking as many photos as you could. Quite often there I was shooting with the Honor Magic 4 Pro, and there I was snapping away and like not sort of doing it to make a point to actually put the camera through its paces, but I was just sort of doing it with general usage, and sometimes I wasn't able to get that snap that I was trying to get every single time, and really that is an issue with you know, something which should be an extremely powerful camera, an extremely powerful phone when you look at its spec sheet. For me, this certainly feels like an Android versus iOS thing, and for some reason Android just hasn't totally figured out how to snap away constantly, like super quick, super fast paced, whereas the iPhone does and just has this sort of super wrapped up in its back pocket. Another one here I have to sadly mention as well is the battery life. I was kind of quite disappointed in general with the battery life. I think that for a sort of a fairly big flagship device now, we should be getting a decent, like completely full day of battery, regardless of what you do with it. And certainly when I was out shooting photos with the Honor Magic 4 Pro, I was actually quite disappointed with the battery life. Within 2 hours of shooting, it was clearly making a fairly substantial impact on the device's battery. This is not a full, like, in-depth review on the phone because I simply haven't tested it enough to be giving that review, but I would say that if you are serious about creating content, taking photos with this phone, you may need to be thinking about some type of external battery solution, or maybe looking at another phone with a more comprehensive battery life like the S22 Ultra, which was pretty exceptional when I tested it. So this is an interesting one. Like, this is an interesting device in today's sort of flagship lineup. And I have to admit, I think the Honor Magic 4 Pro is a tough sell in the market today. I think the camera, and you can see like this camera is massive. They have put a massive amount of marketing spend and marketing focus on the camera for this smartphone, and I don't think it is superior enough or really special enough in the modern 2022 lineup of flagship cameras to warrant that, really. I think there's no reason to go for this phone just for its camera, which in terms of the marketing, the campaigns around the phone, definitely seems to be the angle that they're going for. In terms of general usability, I literally had 0 complaints. I haven't done extensive testing. This is not an extensive usability general review. There are other channels that do those types of things far better, and I haven't been using this as my daily phone on a daily basis. But I do have to admit, with the amount of marketing focus and marketing spend on the camera from a photographer's point of view, and I test a lot of smartphone cameras, this one wasn't quite it in terms of a dedicated camera system. I do personally feel like the iPhone 13 Pro Max, the S22 Ultra are all probably pipping it a little bit in terms of camera performance. So then the conversation is, why would I go for something like this over something like that?